So the focus of today is to introduce equations to solve percent problems. So on the left-hand side, I put keywords and percent translations just so you can reference back to that when you are setting up the equations. And on the right side is the actual equation that we're going to use. And that equation says part is equal to percent times whole. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight that because that's important for you to know. So our first problem looks very similar to what we were looking at last week, and it says, what is 12% of 875? So really the way that these are written is exactly how you're going to set up the equation. So the first part of this says, what is? So it means that we're solving for something. So I'm going to use a variable here for the what is, and you can really use any variable for that. So in this case, I'm going to use n, because it represents some number that we're solving for. So n's equal to 12% of 875. So this is telling me that I want a portion of the 875, just 12% of that. So our equation states part is equal to percent times the whole. So the whole is 875, and we're going to multiply that by the percent. So our percent is 12%. And we need to make sure that we change that into a decimal before putting it into the equation. So to go from a percent to a decimal, I'm going to move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So if I'm looking at 12%, the decimal would be behind the 2 because it's a whole number, and I'm going to move it 2 places to the left. So my decimal for 12% would be 0.2. Or sorry, 0.12. All right, so I'm going to take that 0.12 and now I'm going to multiply it by the whole number. And the whole number is 875. So in your calculator now, you can type in 0.12 times 875. And you should get that n is equal to 105. So 12% of 875 would be 105. All right, our next one says 25 is what percent of 500? So 25 is equal to, and it says what percent, so we're solving for the percent here, so I'm going to use P to represent percent of 500. And our equation states that we're going to take the percent and we're going to multiply it by the whole. So the whole is 500. So this equation would read 25 equals P times 500. Now think back to when we worked on one-step equations. In order to get the variable by itself, I have to do the opposite operation. So this says P times 500. So the opposite of multiplying would be to divide by 500. So 25 divided by 500 is going to give us 0.05. Now remember we want our answer to be a percent. So right now when we divided, our answer was a decimal. So to go from a decimal to a percent, I'm going to move the decimal place 2 places to the right. And that would mean our answer is 5%. All right, and lastly, 2 is 4% of what number? So 2 is equal to, and remember we need to change our percent to a decimal before plugging into the equation. So if I have 4% here, and I want to change that to a decimal, I'm going to move my decimal 2 places to the left, which would give us 0.04. So 2 is equal to 0.04, and we don't know what our number is, so I'm going to use n as my variable. So again, we're going to have to divide here because this is saying 0.04 times n. So I'm going to divide by 0.04, and I'm going to divide the other side by 0.04. So we're going to type in 2 divided by 0.04. And that's going to give us that 50 is our answer. So 50 is equal to n. So a couple things I think that we should make note of here, and you can add this to the top of your page. I put it up here. So to get from a decimal to a percent, you need to move 2 places to the right. And then to get from a percent to a decimal, you move 2 places to the left. So now we're going to use our equation to solve some word problems. And the first one here says that we are solving for the percent. And the problem reads, 2 of the dozen eggs in a carton are cracked. About what percent of the carton is not cracked? So our equation that reads part is equal to percent times whole, we need to plug in what we know. So 2 of the dozen means that our part would be 2, and the part is equal to the percent times the whole. Now the whole would be the amount of eggs in the carton. It says there's a dozen eggs, and a dozen means that there are 12. So 2 is equal to the percent, p, which we're solving for, times the whole 12. So 2 is equal to p times 12. Now to cancel out that multiplication, we're going to divide by 12. And 2 divided by 12 is going to give us 0.16 repeating, and that would be equal to our percent. Now our answer is not in percent form. We need to change our decimal into a percent. So I'm going to move my decimal 2 places to the right, and that would give us that our answer is 16.6. And it's 0.6 because those 6's were repeating on your calculator. So instead of there being a 0 there, because the 6's are repeating, it would be 16.6%. Now, the question asked about what percent of the carton is not cracked. So we solved that 2 out of the 12 eggs were cracked, which was 16.6%. And we want to know what portion is not cracked. So if 16.6% is cracked, that means that we would have to subtract that from 100% to figure out what portion of the eggs are not cracked. So 100 minus 16.6 is going to give us 83.4%. So 16.6% is cracked and 83.4% is not cracked. Our next problem, we are solving for the part, and the problem says about 56% of the 2,553 students are enrolled in at least one honors class. How many students are enrolled in an honors class? So our part here is what we are solving for. So I'm going to write n here because we're solving for some number. And that is equal to the percent. And our percent here is 56. And remember to change your 56% to a decimal. So I'm going to add my decimal at the end of 56 and move it 2 places to the left, which would give us 0.56. And I'm going to multiply that by the whole. And the whole would be the number of students enrolled in honors classes. And that was 2,553. So now all you have to do from this point is say 0.56 times 2,553. And that is going to give us that n is equal to 1,429.68. Now, you can't have 0.68 of a student. You either have 1,429 or 1,430. So in this case, we would need to round. And because I have a 0.6 here, that's going to tell us to round up. Remember, 5 or more you round up, and 4 or less stays the same. So our final answer will be 1,430 students. And our last problem here, we are solving for the whole. So the problem reads, a nutrition label states that there are 36 grams of carbohydrates in each serving. This accounts for 12% of the daily value. How many grams of carbohydrates are recommended per day? So 36 carbs would be our part. So I'm going to say 36 is equal to, and our percent in this problem is 12%, and I'm going to change that to a decimal. So again, I'm going to move 2 places to the left, which is going to give us 0.12. And we're solving for the whole here. So I'm going to put n because we're solving for a number here. So 36 is equal to 0.12 times n. To cancel out that multiplication, we're going to have to divide by 0.12 on both sides. And 36 divided by 0.12 is going to give us 300. So the number of recommended carbohydrates per day would be about 300 grams.